3 a.m. I caught our HOA president inside my house with copied keys. She thought she could intimidate a widowed construction worker. But Laura Evans made one fatal mistake. She had no clue my son had just returned home. Not just any son, a United States Marine. What happened next shocked our entire neighborhood and became the most talked about HOA drama in county history. Some battles you think you can win until you realize who you're actually fighting. Comment where you're watching from because this story will make you think twice about every neighbor you've ever trusted. 5 years. That's how long I'd been struggling to keep my head above water since my wife Linda died in that car accident. You know how it feels when you lose your partner. Suddenly you're doing the job of two people. Home maintenance had always been Linda's domain. I'm good with concrete and rebar, but HOA regulations might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Every month, I'd get violation notices that made my blood pressure spike higher than a construction crane. Mailbox height non-compliant by 2 inches. Unauthorized rose bushes. Fence stain color deviation. Each notice came with threats of $500 daily fines. On a construction foreman's salary, that kind of money could break me. That's when Laura Evans showed up at my door with her Academy Award-worthy performance. Picture this. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a designer blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and a clipboard that screamed official business. It was the freshly baked chocolate chip cookies and sympathetic smile that really sold the act. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I've been watching you struggle since Linda passed. I know how overwhelming all these regulations can be for someone in your situation. Someone in my situation. I should have caught that condescending tone right there. But grief and desperation make you stupid." She introduced herself as the HOA president and claimed she was there to help me navigate the complex compliance requirements that were apparently threatening my home. Looking back, I can see exactly what she was doing. Laura had her system down to a science. Target the vulnerable, offer salvation, then strike when they're completely dependent on your help. She validated my confusion about the violations, making me feel like I wasn't crazy for thinking they were unreasonable. "These regulations are deliberately confusing," she explained. "They're designed to trap homeowners who don't understand the system." Then came the lifeline. She could personally guide me through a pre-compliance inspection that would save me thousands in potential penalties. All I had to do was sign a simple consent form giving her access to coordinate the process. The clipboard came out, official HOA letterhead gleaming, and I was reaching for my pen like a drowning man grabbing a rope. That's when my son Marcus walked through the front door, still in his dress uniform from a VA appointment. The air got still. His eyes, usually soft with family love, did a quick, cold scan of the situation. The clipboard, her expensive car through the window, my pen in hand. They locked onto Laura like a targeting system. His voice, when he spoke, wasn't my boy's. It was the voice of a Marine staff sergeant, and it cut through her sweet talk like a knife. "Dad, step away from those documents." I'd seen Marcus in uniform before, obviously, but this was different. This was my son switching into full command mode. And suddenly I realized that the Helpless Widower Act Laura was pushing didn't account for the fact that this family had produced a United States Marine. Laura's confident smile flickered just for a moment when Marcus reached for her paperwork. "Oh, that's really not necessary," she said quickly. "Your father and I have everything handled." But Marcus was already reading, and I saw his jaw tighten with each line. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying that unmistakable authority that comes from leading troops in combat zones. "These authorization forms contain legal language granting unlimited property access. Cite the specific municipal code that requires this level of homeowner compliance." She stammered and backpedaled. Suddenly, all her confident explanations became vague references to standard procedures and coordinating with city officials. When Marcus offered to call the city building department to verify her claims about emergency safety inspections, I watched Laura panic in real time. Instead of retreating when caught in her lies, Laura doubled down. She played the victim, talking about how difficult it was to help people who didn't appreciate her efforts, how she was just trying to save me from legal trouble. Her performance was so convincing I actually felt guilty for questioning her motives. That's the mark of a true predator. They make you feel bad for protecting yourself. Marcus wasn't buying it for a second. He measured the fence setback with a military-grade laser and proved her violation claim was off by 3.5 inches. When he forced her to sign a corrected measurement report with Mrs. Cooper from next door as a witness, Laura's facade cracked just enough to show the fury underneath. The moment that should have been my first real warning came as Laura was leaving. She made a mysterious phone call while sitting in her expensive SUV right outside my house. Marcus, with his training in reading body language and interpreting threats, could tell something was seriously wrong. I was still stuck in that grateful mindset, thinking maybe she really was trying to help and I just embarrassed her with my suspicious son. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "that woman isn't here to help anyone. She's here to take our house." I wanted to believe he was being paranoid, that his military training was making him see enemies where there were just neighbors. Laura sat in her car for nearly 10 minutes, gesturing angrily as she spoke to someone on the phone. Whatever conversation she was having, it was about us. And from her body language, it wasn't good news. The cookies she'd brought were still warm on my counter when Marcus pulled me aside for a serious conversation. "Dad, I need you to listen to me carefully. That woman spent the entire time here asking questions that had nothing to do with HOA compliance. She wanted to know your work schedule when you're home alone, whether you have security systems. She was casing this place like a target." He showed me the corrected measurement she'd signed, pointing out how her handwriting got shaky when she realized she'd been caught in a lie. "Professional scam artists don't usually lose their composure that easily," he explained. "She's either new at this or she's desperate. Either way, that makes her dangerous." I stood there holding those cookies, feeling like the biggest fool in the world, finally understanding that my son's paranoia might actually be keeping us alive. But as I watched Laura make that phone call, I couldn't shake one terrifying question. Who was she really calling? And what was she planning to do to my family next? The next morning brought a legitimate city building inspector to my door, and I thought maybe I'd been wrong about Laura after all. The guy was professional, had proper credentials, and seemed to know what he was talking about. He explained the routine safety inspection that the HOA had coordinated for older homes in our neighborhood. I felt like an idiot for doubting Laura's intentions, until I realized this was exactly what she'd been planning all along. She showed up 20 minutes after the inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, playing the helpful HOA coordinator role to perfection. "I'll hold your keys while you show him the electrical panel in the basement," she offered with that same synthetic smile. "These inspections can be confusing, and I know exactly what the city requires for compliance documentation." Looking back, I can see how perfectly she'd orchestrated the whole thing. The inspection was legitimate. She'd used her actual authority as HOA president to schedule it through proper channels. The inspector was real. The paperwork was official and everything appeared above board. But while I was downstairs pointing out circuit breakers and explaining our home's electrical history, Laura was upstairs with my house keys, pressing them into some kind of molding compound she'd hidden in that professional-looking clipboard. Marcus was at work on a construction site across town, but the security cameras he'd insisted on installing were recording everything. When I watched that footage later, seeing Laura's careful, practiced movements as she copied our keys, I realized this woman had done this before. Multiple times. The inspector finished his work, filed his report, and left satisfied that our home was safe. Laura lingered just long enough to establish the perfect alibi. She'd been present during an official city inspection, helping a confused widower navigate bureaucratic requirements. Anyone reviewing the paperwork would see a helpful HOA president doing her job. What they wouldn't see was the criminal conspiracy she'd just executed. That evening, while I was feeling grateful for Laura's assistance and proud that our house had passed inspection, she was already planning her first illegal entry using those copied keys. 2 days later, I came home from work to find subtle signs that someone had been in my house. Tools in my garage were moved slightly. Papers on my desk weren't quite where I'd left them. And there was this feeling, if you've ever been burglarized, you know it, that your personal space has been violated. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, influenced by Marcus' suspicious nature. But when I called him at work and described what I was seeing, he accessed our security cameras through his smartphone and confirmed my worst fears. The footage showed Laura entering our house at 1:15 p.m. using our own keys like she owned the place. Watching that video was like getting punched in the stomach. There she was, the woman I'd trusted to help me navigate HOA regulations, systematically violating every boundary of human decency. She wasn't just looking around. She was actively sabotaging our home, loosening a handrail here, creating what looked like electrical hazards there, taking professional quality photos of every fake violation she created. The calculated nature of it was what really got to me. This wasn't some crime of opportunity. This was a business model. She had a system, a process for turning homeowners into victims. And I'd walked right into her trap like a lamb to slaughter. When Marcus got home that night, he didn't waste time on "I told you so" lectures. Instead, he immediately shifted into tactical mode, treating our situation like the security threat it had become. "Dad, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here," he said, pulling up county records on his laptop with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of gathering intelligence in hostile territory. What we discovered painted a picture of financial desperation that made Laura's criminal behavior suddenly make terrible sense. Her house was in foreclosure with only 19 days remaining before auction. Medical liens showed cancer treatment bills totaling $127,000. And most telling of all, divorce papers filed 2 weeks earlier cited financial fraud as grounds for dissolution of marriage. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Laura wasn't just some power-hungry HOA president abusing her authority for kicks. She was facing complete financial destruction, and our home represented her only chance at survival. The property values in our neighborhood had skyrocketed over the past 2 years, and our corner lot was worth every bit of $350,000. If she could force us to sell at a distressed price, say $180,000, to avoid legal troubles and mounting violations, she could flip it for enough profit to save herself from bankruptcy and homelessness. It was a brilliant plan in a sociopathic sort of way. Target vulnerable families, manufacture crisis, offer solutions that benefit only herself. Marcus spent an hour researching the proper legal format for a no trespass notice. "We need to make this official," he explained, typing carefully. "From now on, if she comes near our property, it's a crime." Then he did something that showed just how seriously he was taking this threat. He changed every lock in our house that same night. "Dad, from now on, every interaction with that woman gets documented," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We're building a case that's going to destroy her in court, but we need to be smarter than she is." The military precision with which he approached our defense gave me confidence for the first time since this nightmare began. The next morning brought a phone call that confirmed everything Marcus had predicted about Laura's true nature. The inspector mentioned that Laura had asked him specifically about our work schedules and security setup, questions that had nothing to do with building safety. "She seemed very interested in your keys," he said. "She asked unusual questions about your work schedule and paid more attention to your security setup than to the actual safety compliance issues. I've been doing this job for 15 years. And that kind of behavior raises red flags." When I told him about the copied keys and illegal entry, his response was immediate. "Mr. Harris, you need to file a police report right now. What you're describing is a pattern I've seen before." Laura received Marcus' no trespass notice and responded exactly as we expected, with escalating threats and legal intimidation. Her phone call was a masterpiece of manipulation, alternating between playing the victim and aggressive posturing. "That notice is a legal harassment of an elected HOA official," she screamed. "I have emergency access authority granted by city ordinance, and your son's military intimidation tactics won't work on me." When I calmly explained that she'd stolen our keys and broken into our house, her mask slipped completely. "I have legal access to ensure compliance. You'll regret crossing me." The fury in her voice, the entitled rage at being challenged, told us everything we needed to know about the person we were dealing with. But what we discovered the next morning made me wonder. How long had she been watching us? And what else had she already done that we didn't know about? The answer arrived in the form of an overnight FedEx delivery 3 days after we'd sent the no trespass notice. Inside was a professionally formatted document titled Emergency Access Authorization, bearing what appeared to be my signature on official HOA letterhead. The problem? I'd never signed any such document, and Laura had screwed up in the most amateur way possible. She'd forged my middle initial as Michael instead of Mitchell. It's funny how criminals trip themselves up on the small details. Marcus studied that signature with the same intensity he'd once used to analyze enemy communications, documenting every inconsistency with forensic precision. The pen pressure was wrong, the letter spacing was off, and the date showed it was supposedly signed during the building inspection when I'd been in the basement the entire time. "Dad, this isn't just fraud," Marcus explained, photographing the document from multiple angles. "This is a systematic criminal conspiracy. She's creating a paper trail to justify her illegal activities after the fact." He pulled out my mortgage documents to compare signatures. The differences were obvious even to me. The woman who had seemed so professional had made the kind of mistake first-year law students learn to avoid. But what really chilled me was realizing that this forged authorization was probably just the beginning. If she was willing to commit felony fraud to justify her break-ins, what other crimes was she planning to pin on us? The next few days brought a cascade of escalating harassment that showed just how desperate Laura was becoming. Official-looking letters arrived daily, each one claiming new violations and threatening increasingly severe penalties. Notice of intent to fine, 48-hour compliance or legal action will commence. Property condemnation warning, structural violations detected during emergency inspection. The language was designed to terrorize me into submission, and I'll admit it worked. Even knowing these documents were fraudulent, the constant stream of legal threats wore me down. I started second-guessing every decision, wondering if maybe I should just sell the house and move somewhere simpler, somewhere without HOA presidents who turn property management into psychological warfare. Then Marcus' investigation into Laura's background revealed something that changed everything. We weren't her first victims. County records showed a disturbing pattern over the past 2 years. 3 other families in nearby neighborhoods had sold their homes at below-market prices after being hit with identical harassment campaigns. The Johnson family, Marine veteran, PTSD. The Williams family, elderly father, drowning in fake fines. The Pattersons, she tried to copy their keys during a fake water meter inspection. Every victim fit the same profile. Vulnerable families with property she wanted, systematically destroyed through manufactured crisis until they either sold cheaply or fled entirely. The most sickening discovery was that Laura had been specifically targeting military families. Marcus found social media posts where she'd researched veterans' disability benefits, family situations, and financial vulnerabilities. She turned preying on people who had served our country into a profitable business model. "Dad, she didn't randomly pick us," Marcus said, his voice carrying a cold anger I'd only heard when he talked about enemy combatants overseas. "She studied us. She weaponized our grief and my service. How do you ever trust a neighbor again after learning something like that?" The calculated cruelty made me want to drive over to her house and have the kind of conversation that would definitely violate my son's legal strategy. That's when Laura made her next move, recruiting an accomplice for what she clearly intended to be the final phase of her operation. Her nephew Jake, a 20-year-old college student desperate for tuition money, got a sob story about his dying aunt fighting cancer while being harassed by an unstable veteran. Laura promised him $5,000 from her house sale commission if he'd help with one final inspection to document safety violations. The kid was reluctant but broke, and Laura played every emotional manipulation card in her deck. She showed him fake medical records and painted pictures of me as a dangerous veteran who needed to be stopped before I hurt someone. What Laura didn't know was that Jake was smarter than she thought. Something felt wrong, especially when she started talking about planting evidence to make the violations more obvious. When she handed him a bag of what looked like illegal drugs and told him they needed to document substance abuse in the household, Jake realized his aunt wasn't asking him to help with safety inspections. She was asking him to help frame an innocent family. Instead of going along with her plan, he did something that probably saved our lives. He secretly recorded their conversation and then reached out to Marcus through a veteran support group online. The recording Jake provided was devastating evidence of Laura's criminal intent. We could hear her voice clear as day explaining how to plant methamphetamine in my military gear to make it look like PTSD drug abuse. She discussed stolen Vietnam War medals from other veteran families that would make the framing more believable, and even mentioned forged court documents that would confuse police response by making it appear I was already under investigation. The level of premeditation was staggering. This woman had planned every detail of our destruction, right down to the specific drugs she'd used to destroy my son's career and our reputations. Marcus listened to that recording with the kind of focused intensity I'd seen him use when studying enemy positions. "Dad, she just made a fatal tactical error," he said finally. "She assumed her nephew would be loyal no matter what, and she documented her own criminal conspiracy." He contacted Jake directly, offering him immunity and protection in exchange for full cooperation with law enforcement. The kid was terrified but willing to do the right thing, especially after Marcus explained that this wasn't just fraud. It was an attempt to destroy lives built through service and sacrifice. The most chilling part of Jake's testimony was what he revealed about Laura's timeline. She'd given herself exactly 1 week to complete our destruction because that's when the foreclosure auction was scheduled for her own home. If she couldn't force us to sell and generate the cash she needed, she'd lose everything anyway. This meant we were dealing with a woman who had nothing left to lose, making her infinitely more dangerous than a petty HOA tyrant. A person facing complete ruin will take risks rational criminals would never consider. That night, as I sat in my living room, knowing that somewhere across town a desperate woman was planning to destroy my family with planted drugs and forged evidence, I realized the situation had moved far beyond anything I could handle on my own. But I also realized something else. I'd raised a son who had the skills and determination to outmaneuver even the most cunning enemy. Marcus was already 3 steps ahead of Laura's plan, and I was starting to understand that this war wasn't going to end with our defeat. Finding out Laura had cancer should have made me feel sorry for her. Instead, it made me terrified, because if a dying woman was this desperate to steal our home, what line wouldn't she cross to get it? Laura's next move proved that Marcus had been right about her desperation. Instead of backing down, she waged war on our reputation through the neighborhood's online community group. Her posts were masterpieces of manipulation designed to turn every neighbor against us by exploiting the worst stereotypes about veterans. "Dangerous veteran threatens peaceful residents with military intimidation tactics," read her first post, accompanied by doctored photos showing alleged property damage she claimed Marcus had caused in retaliation. The images looked convincing at first glance. Broken fence boards, damaged mailboxes, spray paint, but Marcus trained I immediately spotted digital manipulation. What got under my skin was how she weaponized her cancer diagnosis to gain sympathy while painting my son as an unstable threat. "I'm fighting for my life against this terrible disease," she wrote, "and now I have to live in fear because this PTSD veteran can't handle normal neighborhood rules." She claimed Marcus had threatened her with violence, that he used military surveillance tactics to stalk her, and that his combat training made him unpredictable. The posts got dozens of sympathetic comments from neighbors who didn't know the truth. I watched our reputation getting destroyed in real time by someone who understood exactly which emotional buttons to press. But Laura had made a critical error. She'd declared psychological warfare against someone trained by the U.S. Marine Corps in exactly that type of combat. Marcus downloaded every one of her posts with timestamps and metadata, then used his technical training to analyze the digital evidence she'd presented. The results were devastating to her credibility. Every single photo showed clear signs of manipulation software with file creation dates proving the damage images were created before the incidents they supposedly documented. Marcus' counterattack was a thing of beauty. Instead of getting into a mudslinging match, he posted a calm, factual timeline with supporting evidence that demolished Laura's narrative piece by piece. He uploaded security camera footage showing her illegal entry into our home, the forged authorization document with her obvious signature mistakes, audio recordings from Jake proving her intent to plant evidence, county records revealing her financial desperation. He presented everything with a methodical precision that made it impossible for reasonable people to doubt who was telling the truth. The community's response was swift once people saw actual evidence instead of Laura's emotional manipulation. Mrs. Cooper immediately posted her own account of witnessing Laura's harassment tactics, and suddenly other neighbors started sharing their stories. The Patterson family described how Laura tried to copy their keys during a fake inspection. A veteran family from 2 streets over revealed receiving similar harassment until they'd been forced to sell and move. The Johnson family even joined the online discussion from their new home, detailing how Laura's campaign had destroyed their finances. Person after person stood up to express outrage at how she'd exploited their trust. But the real turning point came when Laura's husband, Richard, made his own post announcing their divorce. "I cannot be associated with criminal fraud activities," he wrote in a statement likely cleared by his attorney. "I am cooperating fully with law enforcement and have no knowledge of the illegal activities described in these posts. I request that the community direct all future communications through my legal counsel." Watching Laura's husband abandon her publicly was brutal, but it also confirmed what we suspected. Even those closest to her couldn't defend her actions when the evidence was laid out. That's when Laura made her most desperate move yet, filing a false police report claiming Marcus had threatened her with violence and demanding an immediate restraining order. She provided what she claimed was audio evidence of threats. But when the responding officer asked Marcus to provide counter-evidence, the truth became obvious. Marcus played the original audio from our security system, proving her evidence had been edited to remove context and add threatening language that had never been spoken. The officer's response was swift. "Ma'am, filing false reports is a serious felony. You need to understand the legal consequences of wasting police resources with fraudulent claims." The attempted restraining order backfired spectacularly, triggering a more thorough police investigation into Laura's activities. Suddenly, law enforcement was taking statements from all her previous victims, documenting a clear pattern of harassment and fraud targeting vulnerable families. The city inspector who'd unknowingly facilitated her key-copying scheme came forward with his own testimony about her suspicious behavior. Even the locksmith she'd approached about emergency HOA access contacted police to report that he'd been deceived about her authority. Meanwhile, Marcus had been building relationships with the local veteran community, and word about Laura's targeting of military families spread quickly through informal networks. The VFW chapter started showing up at our house to offer support. Suddenly, Laura found herself facing not just one Marine family, but an entire community of veterans who took attacks on their brothers personally. Staff Sergeant Harris represents the finest values of American military service. Their spokesman announced at the next HOA board meeting, "Any assault on his character is an assault on all of us." The sight of 24 veterans in uniform standing behind Marcus made it clear that Laura had picked the wrong fight. Perhaps the most satisfying moment came when we discovered security footage from a neighbor's camera capturing Laura having a complete breakdown in her car after a community meeting. She was screaming into her phone about how unfair everything was, how she deserved better than some construction worker's family, and how she'd make us pay for ruining her plans. The raw entitlement and fury, stripped of her fake sympathy and professional courtesy, showed everyone exactly who she was. When that video circulated, even her few remaining supporters quietly disappeared. The final blow to Laura's credibility came when an anonymous neighbor leaked photos of foreclosure notices posted on her door, along with medical bills showing her cancer treatment had actually been completed months earlier. Her sob story about fighting for her life while being harassed by unstable veterans was just another manipulation. The community realized they'd been played by a professional con artist who'd exploited their natural sympathy for cancer patients to cover up her crimes. As the HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting to address the situation, Laura made one last attempt to control the narrative by scheduling a private meeting with board members to present what she called the full truth about the Harris family threat. She planned to make one final play for community support, using every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. But she didn't know Marcus had spent the week building an airtight case that would expose every one of her lies in front of everyone. Watching Laura break down in her car while screaming into that phone, I started to wonder, was her cancer diagnosis even real? And if she was faking a terminal illness, what else was she lying about? The night before the community meeting, Laura made her most desperate and stupid decision yet. She decided to execute her evidence-planting operation regardless of the risks because she knew the next day would either save her reputation or destroy it. Jake had already confessed everything and agreed to cooperate with police, but Laura didn't know. In her mind, she still had a loyal accomplice and one final chance to frame us before the meeting exposed her crimes. The plan was simple in its criminal audacity. Break into our house at 2:47 a.m., plant meth in Marcus military gear, arrange stolen Vietnam War medals to suggest stolen valor, and have Jake call police with an anonymous tip about suspicious veteran drug activity that would result in our arrest just hours before the meeting. Marcus had predicted this exact scenario and had been preparing for it like a military operation for 3 days. He positioned himself in our living room with night vision equipment, maintaining a vigilant watch while I tried to sleep upstairs. Mrs. Cooper was stationed at her front window with instructions to call 911 the moment she saw anyone approaching our property. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait for Laura's criminal arrogance to walk into IT.at exactly 2:47 a.m. Our motion sensors detected movement in the backyard, and Marcus' phone buzzed with alerts from our security system. Through the cameras, we could see Laura and Jake approaching the house with military-style duffel bags, moving like amateur burglars who'd watched too many heist movies. Laura tried her copied keys first, discovered we'd changed the locks, and flew into a rage that was clearly visible even through night vision. "That bastard thinks he's so smart," she hissed loud enough for our audio equipment to pick up. "Fine, we'll do this the hard way." She forced our garage window open with a crowbar, committing clear breaking and entering, while Jake stood there looking increasingly terrified. The contents of Laura's bag were even more damaging than we expected. Along with the meth and stolen metals Jake had warned us about, she'd brought forged court documents designed to make it appear that Marcus was already under federal investigation. There were fake DEA seizure notices, manufactured evidence bags with official-looking labels, and even a planted cell phone loaded with text messages suggesting drug-dealing activity. The level of premeditation was staggering. She'd planned every detail, right down to creating an entire false criminal history that would have fooled a casual investigation. But the most chilling evidence was a handwritten note detailing her timeline. She planned to have us arrested by 4 a.m., giving her time to spread the news through community channels before the evening meeting. By the time neighbors gathered to discuss her harassment allegations, we'd be sitting in jail on federal drug charges, and she'd be free to spin whatever narrative she wanted about dangerous veterans finally exposed. Jake's breakdown, when he realized what his aunt was doing, provided us with the most damaging testimony we could have hoped for. As soon as Laura started arranging drugs in Marcus' foot locker, Jake began crying and confessing everything. "Aunt Laura, this is definitely illegal. You told me we were just documenting safety violations," he pleaded. He pulled out his phone and started recording her response, which was a furious admission of criminal intent that no lawyer could explain away. "Shut up and help me plant this stuff," Laura snapped. "We need evidence serious enough to destroy his military career and get him arrested before that meeting." Marcus waited until she had fully committed to the crime before making his move. When the lights suddenly blazed on throughout the house, Laura dropped her evidence bag, spilling cocaine and stolen metals across our living room floor. Marcus emerged from the shadows in full tactical gear, his night vision equipment giving him an otherworldly appearance that terrified Laura into total compliance. "Ma'am, you are trespassing in a federal contractor's residence," he announced in his commanding voice. "Remain where you are and do not move toward any exits." The sight of a Marine Staff Sergeant in combat equipment rising out of the darkness was probably the most terrifying moment of Laura's entitled life. Her desperate attempts to lie her way out of the situation provided even more evidence. She claimed she'd heard emergency sounds and come to check on our welfare, despite bringing drugs and burglary tools. When Marcus pointed out the broken window, she tried to claim Jake had done it without her knowledge, throwing her own nephew under the bus. But Jake's recording and the physical evidence made her lies impossible to sustain, especially when Mrs. Cooper's 911 call brought police who could see the scene with their own eyes. The police response was swift, with multiple officers arriving to find Laura surrounded by planted evidence and criminal tools, while Jake sobbed out confessions. The lead officer recognized the situation immediately. This wasn't a domestic dispute, but a serious federal crime involving drugs, stolen military property, and conspiracy to frame a decorated veteran. Laura's arrest was captured on body cameras from multiple angles, including her screaming threats about how we'd regret this and how she'd make sure everyone knew what criminals we really were. The most satisfying moment came when the arresting officer informed Laura that Jake had been cooperating with us for days, providing recordings that documented her entire conspiracy. The look of betrayal and rage on her face when she realized her own nephew had turned against her was priceless. "You little traitor!" she screamed as they loaded her into the police car. "I was trying to save us both. That house should have been ours." The entitled fury, the complete inability to accept responsibility, showed everyone exactly who she was. The evidence inventory the police conducted read like something from a major federal drug case. Planted meth worth over $5,000, stolen metals from at least 3 families, forged federal documents bearing fake DEA seals, professional burglary tools, and electronic surveillance equipment. The scope of her operation was so extensive that federal authorities immediately took jurisdiction, elevating her charges from simple breaking and entering to conspiracy to commit federal crimes against military personnel. But even caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence, even facing federal charges that could put her in prison for decades, she was still focused on destroying us rather than accepting responsibility. Seeing her in handcuffs should have been the end of our nightmare. But as they loaded her into the police car, she looked back at our house with such pure hatred that I couldn't help wondering, even from jail, could she still find a way to hurt us? The community meeting that evening became something none of us could have anticipated. A packed courtroom where 73 neighbors gathered to witness Laura's complete destruction in front of everyone she'd been manipulating. The community center hadn't seen that kind of turnout since hurricane evacuation meetings, and you could feel the electric tension in the air. Even a local news crew showed up, turning a routine HOA discussion into a public spectacle that would define our community for years. Marcus prepared for this moment like a military briefing, laying out Laura's crimes in chronological order with evidence that made denial impossible. He started with the timeline of her initial approach, escalated through each phase of harassment, forgery, breaking and entering, and finally attempted framing. The Ring doorbell footage of her copying our keys played on the big screen, followed by security video of her illegal entries and the audio recordings Jake provided. Watching our neighbors' faces change as they realized the scope of Laura's deception was incredibly satisfying. You could see the exact moment each person understood they'd been manipulated by a master con artist. The most powerful testimony came from Laura's previous victims who attended to ensure the full scope of her crimes was understood. The Johnson family spoke about losing their home and going bankrupt. The Williams family detailed ongoing medical bills from stress-related illnesses caused by her legal battles. Mrs. Patterson described the violation of privacy that came with knowing someone had targeted their family for criminal exploitation. A military family from another county testified about how Laura's harassment had triggered the husband's PTSD and nearly destroyed their marriage. Each testimony built toward the same conclusion. Laura Evans was a predator who weaponized homeowner associations and community trust to destroy innocent families for personal profit. The judge's final sentence reflected both the severity of Laura's crimes and the community impact of her systematic fraud. 4 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised probation with restitution totaling $112,000 to be paid to her victims. She was banned from holding any HOA position statewide and required to register as a housing fraud offender. Most humiliatingly, she was ordered to write formal apology letters to each family she'd victimized. Letters that would be posted on the county's fraud prevention website as public warnings about HOA abuse tactics. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Laura's final words summed up everything wrong with her character. "Your Honor, I still believe I was trying to protect property values in my community," she said. Even at sentencing, she couldn't admit what she'd done. The community transformation that followed Laura's conviction was remarkable and became a model for neighborhood recovery. Property values increased by 18% as word spread about improved governance and zero tolerance for harassment. The Harris Protocol became an official policy requiring majority votes for enforcement actions, written consent for property access, and monthly transparency meetings. Marcus used his experience to establish a veteran family support network now serving 12 neighborhoods, providing legal assistance and advocacy for military families facing housing discrimination. The program has prevented at least 6 similar fraud schemes from succeeding. Without Laura's divisive harassment and manufactured conflicts, neighbors started talking and working together on genuine improvements. The community garden she'd blocked for 2 years finally got approval and became a gathering place where families build real relationships instead of living in fear. The veteran appreciation events Marcus organized brought our community closer while honoring the military families Laura had targeted. Children played together again without parents worrying about HOA complaints, and the atmosphere of suspicion and fear she'd cultivated was replaced by cooperation and mutual support. 2 years later, Laura's transformation from entitled HOA president to convicted felon working minimum wage retail became a cautionary tale that spread throughout our county. People occasionally spotted her bagging groceries at the discount store across town. The few neighbors who encountered her in public reported that she looked broken and defeated. Her expensive clothes and professional styling were gone, replaced by the appearance of someone who'd lost everything and was struggling to survive on wages she'd never imagined earning. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the way this experience strengthened the relationship between Marcus and me. Watching my son use his military training to protect our family and community gave me a pride that went beyond normal parental feelings. He came home from serving his country and immediately stepped up to serve his neighbors, using the same courage and intelligence that had made him an effective Marine to become a leader in civilian life. The boy I'd raised became a man who could handle any challenge with honor and determination. I realized that everything Linda and I had done to support his military career had been worth every sacrifice. Laura eventually completed her prison sentence and began her probation period under strict supervision. Community members were notified of her release, but by then she'd become irrelevant to our daily lives. We'd built something better in her absence, a neighborhood where people looked out for each other instead of looking for ways to exploit each other. The fear and division she created through manipulation and fraud had been replaced by trust and cooperation. Mrs. Cooper, now in her 70s, became our informal neighborhood grandmother, organizing social events and conflict resolution. Marcus used his GI Bill to complete a criminal justice degree and joined the district attorney's office as a victim advocate specializing in housing fraud cases. His experience with Laura gave him unique insights that have helped protect dozens of other families. The skills he learned fighting one criminal HOA president now protect entire communities. As for me, I learned that asking for help doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. Having the humility to accept my son's protection and the community's support taught me that strength comes from connection, not isolation. The house Linda and I built together remained our family home, but it also became a symbol of what's possible when good people stand together against those who prey on others for personal gain. Every time I walk through the rooms where Laura planted evidence to destroy us, I'm reminded that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about building something better from the ashes of what criminals try to destroy. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that Laura Evans did us an unexpected favor. Her criminal targeting of our family brought out the best in our community and showed us what we were capable of when we worked together instead of living in fear. She thought she could destroy us with lies and manipulation, but instead she gave us the opportunity to build something better than what we had before. That's how my Marine son showed Laura Evans who's really boss. Not through violence or intimidation, but through discipline, evidence, and the kind of integrity they teach you in the military. Laura learned that when you mess with one military family, you mess with everyone who believes in doing right. She thought she could use her master key to steal our home. Instead, she handed us the keys to destroy her completely. And that's a lesson that made our whole neighborhood stronger, safer, and better than it ever was before. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button. Your support helps us bring more real-life drama and justice stories to light. Thanks for watching HOA Unfiltered, and I'll see you in the next video where we dive into another unbelievable true story that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. Until then, keep standing up for what's right.